I sometimes find with certain real side experiences that even though it is the first time I have had a particular experience, that I have no current memory file reference of having experienced such on the real side or the physical in this current lifetime. During the experiencing of such, I will recognize I have done such before. For the isness, as the term implies, is everything. Everything creational will therefore be present in its reality. Every idea ever created that becomes a part of consciousness that affects its assimilated nature throughout all assimilated creational realms will be present in this everything true reality. And as the true essence of ourselves, that which we actually are, the real awareness, is a part of this everything reality, as the real awareness is what animates through all consciousness, so it is the one overall isness that is through everything creational, every body form and assimilation effected from the intent set and the ideas decided upon and created. Consequently, from the real awareness position and overall everything perspective, every idea of every consciousness is available and can be shown to any of the created personal selves, if indeed they are open to it and it makes sense to do so. The position of the personal self and perspective, however, is far more limited, as it only can draw upon the references, the experiences that have been collated in each current lifetime, physical level and real side. For in each new lifetime, so is the conscious memory area as though reset, devoid of information and experience, and all that which has been experienced prior to the current lifetime is rather transferred into the subconscious. The ideas are still present and affecting their nature, however, until the moment we choose to face and release them, but the conscious personal self oblivious of them generally. A little like transferring all the data on the computer to a backup drive, liberating the computer's storage capacity once again, though the data is still retained. As multi-dimensional beings, we are experiencing constantly, and far more than what can be shown to the personal self. Realistically, as each of us are the same overall true reality that the real awareness is a part of, we are each experiencing everything creational through the ideas effected as a simulation as decided by all the individualized personal selves. Everything being experienced in the ever nowness moment of the is, including what we would construe from the personal self's perspective as a past, present and future lifetimes. And so of the everything that is creationally occurring in the nowness of the is, that which the personal self may be shown may indeed be the first time it has experienced such, according to its current consciousness memory records, but the familiarity stems then from the real awareness, as it simply shows the personal self an idea that has effected as a simulation from its forever database where everything, every idea of a consciousness is. Duane refers to this database of everything as the universal files, and on occasion we may then be accessing certain files from it via the real awareness that is a part of the is. The is, which would encompass the universal files and impressions of familiarity, become known to the personal self. And as I said, we are experiencing constantly on the real side, but various factors come into play as to the extent of what is revealed to the personal self, or indeed recollected on waking. We may be having a succession of a particular type of real side experience spanning months, years, even lifetimes, but may only perhaps be shown one episode at a particular time, and then have the sense of familiarity that indeed we have been experiencing such before. This would be the case with this real side experience, that it was one that had been reoccurring constantly, and had been doing so for many years, as my impressions suggested, very likely from the moment I sang the New You for the first time. And although I have had experiences of a similar theme and purpose, this one would be unique in its design. And as I said, only the other night was the personal self shown what was in reality a constant experience. Perhaps unnecessary then for it to be constantly shown, for on previous real side experiences of a similar theme, they would present as though groups of individuals competing or combating with each other. Although this would be for purposes other than the consideration that what one desires can only be achieved through the besting, diminishing, or defeating of others, as creation is designed that anyone can have whatever they want. The mechanics provide whatever we desire as effected from the ideas we create, or the ideas we agree with as created by others, and instead these competition-orientated experiences would be between those of a becoming more aware persuasion, some of which would be as though a practice or a training, just like any military outfit, where the soldiers are honed and toughened for the rigours of the battlefield. In the case of those becoming more aware, representing another means of a preparation for being better able to handle and deal with creation, as many times the aware groups and myself would recreate all the manner of potential scenarios, as though a role-playing and a wargaming that which we each will invariably have to face at some point on the real side or the physical, and thus we are better practiced to manage the effects we are to walk into, the karma we must deal with, etc. On some occasions would certain positions be available, each individual as the unique beings that they are, through the personal selves they operate within creation, the consciousness they have constructed, so each will have differing skill sets and abilities, and so these competing themed-based experiences represent a determining of the best positioning for each individual based on their abilities. For would it make sense for a wolf to take on a position where flying is required if an eagle is available? As I said, this particular real side experience was along similar lines, and only now was it not only revealed, but also that it had been a constant for many years. It had incorporated those becoming more aware, stationed in a vast terrain, a natural setting, the various individuals divided into small groups, and it was so that each group would have to eliminate all others and emerge victorious, although, as I said, a kind of role-playing and training where no individual was in any way harmed. The means of elimination was curious, to my personal self at least, in that we would have to construct something utilising minerals and materials that were available and scattered throughout the terrain, and then we would in some way ignite it, and this would be the means by which the other teams could be eliminated. As proximity to these created devices would remove them from the terrain, perhaps more symbolic than literal, and maybe not all details and specifics of which my personal self could determine, it's likely it may have looked completely different from the perspective views of the others involved, but throughout the years of this particular training, my particular group and I had become very adept at it, and then would be the moment where I would have this particular experience again, the sense of familiarity accompanying it, and as though a quick real awareness afforded a rerun of the training that spanned the years that it had. For I would find myself initially sat with a member of my group, and from his perspective I had never departed. From my personal self-perspective, this was my first inception into this experience. He was telling me how he, myself, and our group ought compete in a more advanced version of the training. As I sat there, as I received the quick rerun and recap, as though being brought up to speed via the real awareness in regards to the constant nature of this experience, I would respond to him that we needed more practice. For naturally, training always will become more so, assuming there are greater levels of durability and capability to reach, and if we construe this as overall that which will better facilitate our process of awareness, really then there is no end to it, as awareness, the isness, is endless, with always more to recognise and be aware of. And so we always must progress, but in reality we are actually regressing in a sense. If we are this complete isness everything already, then we are simply removing that which has us positioned other than this completeness everything, removing the limitations and filters that overlap the full magnitude of our isness states of being. Dwayne always referred to it as falling backwards into the ease. And even though the next step of awareness would be more arduous, the escalating levels of training symbolically, I would agree, for the moment we stop our awareness at that point, our awareness then remains at that point. And so, as I would enter the training terrain again, and indeed the heightened difficulty translated as the inability to as easily construct that which was the tool for elimination of the other teams, the materials harder to find, and then as though difficulty in igniting it. One second. We would momentarily step out from the training. We would be present now in a street setting, and were seeking an audience with the two individuals, and we would locate them. Both were black, a male and a female, clothed in elaborate robes, and possessing each of a great awareness as impressions revealed. We spoke to them of our inability to be effective with the training. It suggested overall a level of awareness my group and I were lacking, hence our performance and inability. And the two aware beings would present us with a glowing stone of some kind, symbolic perhaps of providing the personal self with an idea, as a stone and rock is very much representational of the physical, and more so than the creational personal side, but an idea that when incorporated and taken on would align the personal self more so, I would suggest, with the real intent, which would in turn facilitate the ability to be more of that which we already are, real awareness beings of everything isness light, with more of the personal restrictions which limit this ultimate position removed. Just as well this was the case, because as we returned to the training grounds, the difficulty level had been increased again, in that none of the materials needed to construct the device that eliminated the other participants were available, symbolic of a training then that required greater awareness. Also, all participants, all groups, had been humans predominantly up until this point, but now additionally were another body type involved, and these would be the reptilians. The reptilians have been stepping up and deciding to become more aware than ever before as things currently stand, and this has been revealed in recent real-side experiences I and others have shared, and this experience was again another verification of this, the reptilians participating in this particular training with the humans, which only increased the difficulty of the training overall, beneficial then, as this would push everyone's awareness more so, as the reptilians who do step up tend to excel in their awareness processes. They are generally natural risk takers and can become very capable very quickly, and this was the case here. Interestingly, the reptilians would choose to assume the forms of dinosaur-like raptors, and as I said, all benefited far more greatly with the influx of them into this training terrain. The experience would end there, and undoubtedly this particular training for creational preparation and indeed awareness bolstering will continue, will escalate and become more challenging, and many more species and body forms will get involved in this and others of its kind, as part of the overall process of awareness each who choose to embrace are going through. In an altogether separate scene that followed, I would find myself amidst a gathering of individuals. It seemed a random situation, and one that perhaps I may have overlooked. However, there would be presented on a kind of staging area a large monstrous beast, and I would be invited to as though confront it. This is along similar themes as shared by Jeremy and the other new friends in recent weeks, whereas we face the consciousness, that which it comprises of often presents as a monster or a dragon, for as Dwayne has revealed, the consciousness is very much fear-based, and the facing of the consciousness would involve then a facing of the fear that it overall comprises of and is infused with, as represented by the confronting of a dragon or a monster. However, before I could face this consciousness fear beast, two women would approach me. They would be invisible to all but myself, their bodies aglow with a white light and sprouting wings. They looked very much as angels are often depicted, and they would beckon me and wish that I accompany them. Before I even considered my next course of action, another woman, though one very ordinary and human-looking in comparison to these angelic beings, would warn me that they were deceptors, for impressions revealed that this woman was a very aware being, that she could evidently see these angels, and as she ushered her warning, the angels would transform into that which they actually were. as though electing to drop their outer angelic appearances as they had been exposed. They would assume their actual forms, looking very demonic indeed. Evidently, it was a ruse to have me accompany them, which would be tantamount to agreement, and to be in agreement with the demons of an ill-intended inclination, as impressions revealed was indeed the case, so the effects that follow may not be very savoury. Despite the demons now revealed, they still insisted I go with them, despite the aware woman's warning and advice to the contrary. But with all agreements, yes, we may then have to deal with the effects, the karma we take on, but unless we hold to these ideas, unless we cling to them emotionally, we are not bound by them, and all experience, regardless of their nature, are further viewpoints and comparisons for his recognizing purposes. And besides, I tend to always be curious of an exploratory nature, and so I would accompany the demons. They led me through a kind of shimmering vortex, and we entered what appeared to be a hellish realm of some kind, probably an area of the lower astral, and as the demons gave me as though a sight-seeing tour of this dark area of creation, a place of abomination, twisted and distorted body forms and ill intent, they seemed to think that they now had me hostage, that they could retain me in their lower astral domain, and would proceed to bind me with the chains and such like. I would remain until I had seen all I wanted, my curiosity catered for, and although the demons seemed pleased with themselves, I simply removed the agreement, the idea that had me as the simulated experience recipient of their control and attentions, and faded from the scene, despite the shackling of my body form, as a simulation always follows the idea agreements we create or hold to. Remove the agreement, the simulation no longer can follow, and will not be our experience. In one final scene, I would be in the company of a real guide. Impressions would reveal this to be the case, despite him assuming the form of my father. As often will the guides present in the outward appearances of parental figures and older siblings. It was as though he was simply bestowing information to my personal self, and on this occasion he would speak of a being who had been residing in the lower astral for the longest time, and would have been considered and be in the position of a kind of demonic god. Such was the decided creation of his consciousness, that he had godlike capability, and had the agreement which cemented such a position. Apparently, he had once assumed a human lifetime, had claimed a position of prominence many thousands of years ago on Earth, and had caused untold havoc as a consequence, through the influence that such a positioning could provide. He then had returned to the lower astral on the death of his physical human body, and had been dwelling there ever since as this godlike demon. However, in recent times, he had again facilitated his assumption of a human body form on Earth. Only this time he had stepped up with the real guides. He was deciding to become more aware and operate in more life and awareness beneficial ways, and this was indeed the reason why he had been able to once again take on a physical level human body form. It had been arranged by the guides, and they had been working with him from the moment of his birth, and now currently would he be a middle-aged man. The guide also revealed that this demonic being had been responsible for the original creation of the vampire and werewolf body form, body types that generally are lower astral based, but physical level operating also, and are in affiliation with the dark forces in various nefarious capacities. And so, the subsequent bloodlines of a vampire and werewolf, the two species' means of increasing in numbers tends be by the converting of others to their kind, would be intrinsically and karmically linked to this lower astral-based god being who had initially given rise to their kind. As such, on a conscious and subconscious level, all werewolves and vampires are in agreement with this being, and very much revere him as their god. As such, he can wield great influence over the decisions, choices and intent all vampires and werewolves will create and act upon. And so, not only had this demonic being assumed a human form, was working with the guides and becoming more aware, but also the idea was that he could rein in the werewolves and the vampires, that even if they themselves individually decided not to become more aware and recognise the is, at least they would no longer operate in ill-intended capacities as now dictated by the demon god in human form. Interestingly, this was a part of the plot as depicted in the movie series Underworld, of an eternal battle between werewolves and vampires, where a single individual was the father of the original werewolf and a vampire, which then gave rise to all that would follow. Again, the dark forces have a tendency to reveal what actually is taking place, especially with the major blockbuster movies. And indeed, would the guide reveal to me the individual's identity, the human that this demon now was, and I would recognise this man. The guide also showing me an artist's drawing of this demon, when he once was as a human before, and caused the mayhem he once did many thousands of years ago. And there was a resemblance, in fact, especially with the eyes and eyebrows. The guide rather suggested I keep his identity concealed, at least for the time being, as his position was a little delicate, as they were managing him carefully, and rather didn't wish for unnecessary attention drawn to him, for as I said, he very likely could potentially encourage all werewolves and vampires in their various forms and expressions to step up and become more aware, in the very least, to prevent them from continuing along their general decided lines of destruction of themselves and others. That was that.
Well, that was just terrific, Kevin. Yes, how fun. So, little by little, it's trickling through and going through these agreements, and we're so fortunate to know and have the real guidance here with us, and that we're waking up and seeing that this is what life is, more so than what we've been raised through here, a bunch of nonsense. And so again, getting through it, it's all valid, but making sense of it and getting on with it. No, that's great. What a validation. And so how fun. Yes, thank you so much. Great, thank you.